There's the LA County Arts Tune-Up happening now.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Do you want to?
Hi, everyone. Welcome back. Preservation tips for artists. My name is Brianna McGillivray. I'm the Civic Art Program Coordinator with the LA County Department of Arts and Culture. And I'm joined by my co-host, Lelania Vilanowith, who is our Conservation and Collections Manager here with the county. And we're super excited to be back today with our presenter, Lily Doan, who is going to be speaking on the topic of contracting. Let's get that in writing, how to incorporate presentation considerations into contracts with fabricators and installers. So thank you for coming back, and I'm going to pass it over to Lelania, who's going to introduce our speaker. Lelania, you're just on mute. I'm sorry.
Okay, sorry. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us for our third and last day of the Arts Tune-Up series. Today, we will be joined by Lily Dunn for her session on fabrication installation. And we have two other sessions at 11 a.m. and 1 p.m. Pacific time that we hope you can join us. So Lily is an objects conservator based in Los Angeles. In addition to conservation treatments, her services include collections management and consultation for new commissions, art handling, and exhibitions. When consulting with artists on materials and contracts, Lily's philosophy is to provide pragmatic and balanced information, empowering the artists to make informed decisions about their projects. And as a woman of color, she is dedicated to uplifting diversity in the arts and practicing conservation with a focus on serving the community. Lily holds an MA from the UCLA Getty Conservation Program and is currently a conservator at Los Angeles County Museum of Art at the Watts Tower System in Rodeo, a National Historic Landmark located in South LA. So I'd like to welcome Lily. Let me stop sharing this.
Okay. I'll share my screen. Okay. All right. Thank you, Lelania. And thank you everyone for joining us. I just wanted to start out the talk with kind of a disclaimer. I am not a lawyer, so I am thoroughly unqualified to give any real legal advice. But I do know a lot about preservation, and while a conservator can't write your contract for you, we can weigh in and help you develop preservation-oriented content. I also just wanted to share my views about contracts. I know it's kind of a dry topic, but you know, contracts, it's really about protecting you, the artist, and by protecting you, the artist, it really means it's protecting your money. And I think that's something we can all agree with. So to lay some groundwork, how do fabricators affect the long-term preservation of your artwork? And I do have to admit, my talk is probably more geared towards large-scale public art commissions, because those are the projects where you tend to hire subcontractors like fabricators and installers. So as the artist, you are usually in charge of the design, and part of that is choosing materials, right? And so when you hire a sub, when you hire your fabricator, you know, you make your materials decisions, but I think it tends to be kind of more broad strokes. But you know, the fabricator is really the one who is making materials decisions on a day-to-day basis. They are the ones who are purchasing the raw materials. They're the ones who are putting the materials together, which probably requires another material. Excuse me. And if you've listened in on the other talks, you know that from a conservation perspective, it's the materials that are subject to deterioration. Installers are also really important to preservation of your artwork because they are, up close and personal with your art. They're the ones who are handling your art. They also choose materials, whether it's hanging hardware, whether it's mounts, base plates, nuts and bolts. All of these materials are super important to the longevity of your artwork. Also, maybe your artwork needs to be adhered in place during installation, or maybe they need to choose a system of mortars and grouts for your tile mosaics. So, I know that like maybe there's kind of this view of like, oh, there's like the materials of the art itself, and you don't really think about the fact that installation also introduces materials to the whole system. And nature doesn't discriminate between what is part of the artwork and what is part of the installation. It's all part of the same system, and it's all interacting with each other, and it's all subject to deterioration. Technique is also super important. Are the installers weighing out or measuring out the right proportions? Are they mixing appropriately? Are they waiting for materials to fully dry or cure before introducing another material? Are they preparing the surface correctly? Like Kiernan mentioned in her talk, surface preparation is key, like really key to longevity of an artwork. So definitely installers, fabricators, they play a huge role in long-term preservation. Okay, so when you have those initial meetings with your subcontractors, with your subs, things are probably going really well. They're super amenable. Anything you want, yeah, absolutely, we can make it happen. You want that, we can do it. Or maybe they're saying, oh, my product, the materials that I use, it's the best, it's indestructible. Someone has actually said that to me, indestructible. And we just have to keep in mind that subs are running a business. They need your project, they need your contract to make money, to pay their employees, to keep the lights on. So, they're selling themselves, which, they have to do to drum up business. But when they're promising you the moon and the stars and unicorns, sometimes it can feel like maybe they're moving into the territory of over-promising. And so the way I see it is, if you get what they're promising you in writing, if you draft up a really fair, solid contract, it's just kind of keeping everyone on the level. And transparency is just kind of what we're seeking here. Okay, so how can you go about incorporating preservation considerations into a contract? I think communication, negotiation, discussion, conversations, these are key. I think it's best to avoid the scenario where you draft up your contract and kind of just put in those clauses that are really beneficial to you without first talking to your subs, and then you kind of like send it out to them and just wait and see and hope that they don't say anything and they just sign the contract. Because you also have to remember, you're hiring your subs, they're working for you, so you want to have a really good, solid working relationship with them, because happy subs, happy employees make for a good project. So I think it's so crucial to have these conversations and just work out what your expectations are, and then they can understand what you want, and then they can like tell you, well, I don't know if that's possible, and just work out all the details. And part of this whole process is asking for their warranties, asking for written warranties. That's actually really helpful, because they may not even have anything written down, and it can help you develop your contract. Also, a lot of materials, in order to be used in a particular industry, have to be tested they have to undergo industrial testing to meet certain standards. And a lot of times that data is incorporated into data sheets, which you can look for online for any particular material. I've also found that if the data sheet that's online is not as informative, is missing maybe some details that you're interested in, if you call the manufacturer and talk to a technical specialist, I think that they have like a secret stash of extra data sheets with extra technical information that they kind of like, keep stashed away, and they just bring it out for like annoying people like me who start asking a lot of questions. But you can get so much data from the manufacturer. And it's also possible that your fabricator has done testing for longevity. Maybe they've done UV testing. Maybe they've done testing for outdoor exposure. Ask. If they've done the testing, then that's great documentation to include in your packet. So gather all of this information, have these conversations with your subs and kind of submit it as a package to your conservator. Or you can ask your conservator to do the work for you if you don't want to spend your time doing this type of technical work. And then the conservator will review the documents, will review the specs, make their recommendations, perhaps some modifications, kind of like, make sure you spend some extra time removing residues or extra preparation steps, perhaps. Once you get your conservator recommendations, you can then go back and have even more conversations and work it out with your subs and just say, my conservator, recommended this, and just talk it out. Because you know what? If your subs, especially your installers, have given you a time estimate based on what they think their process is, and your conservator is making recommendations for modifications, it's really crucial for them to understand these modifications so they can maybe adjust their estimate for you. And then once you've done all of this work, all this negotiation, all this talking about expectations and modifications and recommendations, then put it into writing, put it into a contract. And at that point, there's no way that your subs can be surprised once they see it in writing, because we've already talked about it and everything's on the level and everything's clear and expectations are super clear. And you're protected, which is really important. So something that I wanted to point out, and this is my last slide, is as a project manager, I think that it's really important to think through all of the changing of hands that the artwork goes through from fabrication to final installation. Things are being shipped, things are being packed up. Maybe the artwork needs to sit in storage for a minute until it can be delivered to the final installation site. I mean, there could be 3, 4, 5 different changes of hands that the artwork goes through. And if at some point the artwork is damaged and you don't have it clearly laid out in your contract, who is responsible for what time period, and then all of your subs kind of go, oh, I didn't, like your installer, what if during installation, damage is discovered and they say, oh, it was like that when it got here. And your fabricator's like, hey, it looked fine when it left my studio. If you don't have it clearly laid out in your contract, who is responsible for which phase of changing of hands that your artwork goes through, ultimately it's kind of on you. And I know that's what contingencies are for, but we want to try not to dip into our contingencies if we can. So, I mean, I know that's really brief. I hope that I gave some insight that is helpful, and I'm hoping you guys have some questions that I can answer about contracts, yeah, or any other technical questions I can try to answer. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lily.
Sure.
Now we wanted to open this up to discussion in case any artists have any questions per se about their own projects. And if any conservators here have any questions about the process that may or may not be available for many public projects. And we're very happy to have Lily and many of these other conservators that are speaking this week as resources for our artists to contact and to have those conversations during the fabrication and design of their artworks. So we do have a question about having a model of a contract, but as Lily said, she's not a lawyer.
I'm not. So the thing is, lawyers are so expensive. They usually charge, what, $300 an hour? So if you have the resources to hire a lawyer, please, I think that's something that if we have the resources, everyone should be doing. But of course, at $300 an hour, and of all the time that it takes for a lawyer to compile a contract, it can get pretty pricey. So perhaps if you have the resources, maybe you can have a lawyer draft up kind of a general contract, and then you can use that as a basis for your future projects, and sort of take out and add extra addendums that are specific to each project. That's one way. I've had a lawyer friend once tell me that, because lawyers are so expensive, just go onto LegalZoom, because service contracts, which is generally what this type of contract with fabricators and installers are, they're service contracts. They're pretty generalized. There's a very general format that service contracts have, and you can sort of maybe go onto LegalZoom or some other kind of app, take that general template and then start building on it. I just went through this process with a few artists, and I can't remember which app they used to generate their basic contract, but I think it was like 2 pages when they first gave it to me. And by the time I was done with it, I think it's like 8 pages long. So there's clearly a lot more that we can add to it. So.
Yes, we haven't. Do conservators meet with the fabricators and installers with the artists?
I think that varies from project to project. For instance, the project that I'm working on right now with LA County, my contract is with the artists. So I work for the artists, and they have been asking me to directly contact the fabricator. I mean, they do a lot of their own conversations, a lot of, their meetings, and then sometimes they'll just give me like a recap. But when they ask me to meet with the fabricators and the installers, I do. So sometimes I'm the one making the phone calls or writing the emails and CCing them. Other times I think we have had a couple of meetings where we all hopped onto Zoom and met and discussed materials and techniques. So it can be. I think it's really dependent on who the project manager is and what kind of involvement they want the conservator to have.
Lily, can you talk more about how you would write in to a contract this like changing of hands for when an artwork is getting transported and installed, and determining who is responsible for each stage?
Yeah. So this is where it's useful to have a conservator who has experience with museum work, because I'd say within the past 10 years, the majority of conservators in museums are working on these loans that travel internationally. And I've done this, and it can sometimes feel like our job is just all about liability, and it's just all about checking condition and who's responsible for the damage. And so I think it's like, you work with the fabricator, right? And you discuss with them, for instance, okay, in the contract, that obviously they're responsible for fabrication of the artwork, right? High quality workmanship for the fabrication. And then you have to work out the shipping. Who is in charge of the shipping? Where is it going to be shipped to? Who's taking out insurance for the shipping? And then, for instance, this project that I'm working on right now, the fabricators all require full payment for the fabrication before they ship. And I was kind of like, maybe it's better to sort of work out a percentage where maybe you pay the majority of the fabrication contract out to them, but then the rest, maybe 20%, will be released to them after the artwork has safely arrived to the agreed upon destination. And someone on the artist end has been able to inspect, open it up, make sure everything is good to go, nothing is damaged. The artwork is as should be, looks the way the artist wants it to look, because in this case, this is going to be more or less the first time that they will see the final product. I think that they've also worked out a situation where before shipping, the fabricator needs to take images and send them so they can digitally ensure that everything is kind of lined up correctly and looks just right. And once they've done the condition check, then we kind of sign off liability. The fabricator is done with their portion of the work, and then they can be paid out, the final 20% or so of their contract. I don't think fabricators love this. They really want to get paid before the art ships out, because then they're paid and they can be done with it. But I think those little details are so important. And it was kind of like, oh, well, what if things get shipped early and just sits in storage for a while? And it's like, well, what about liability? I mean, if the artwork is in storage, wherever it's in storage for a month waiting for installation, what if it gets damaged at that point? So it's just the planning. It's just kind of timing everything just right so that things are shipped not too late, because you don't want to run behind, but not too early so that you're running into liability issues while it's in storage. So like these condition checks help a lot too, because then when you do the inspection and you note that the artwork has arrived in good condition, then you can sort of release the previous handler from liability, and then it moves on to the next person in line in the chain of command, shall we say.
So we have a question around what the hourly rates an artist can expect to pay a conservator or for a consultation.
I think that's something that you need to negotiate with the conservator. Some conservators will work with you for a flat rate. Others will charge an hourly fee somewhere around probably like $100 an hour, although I can't speak for all conservators. I mean, everyone charges a different rate. And it also depends on how much involvement you want your conservator to have. If you just want, you're going to do most of the work, you're going to compile all the documentation, all the spec sheets, and you submit it to the conservator for review, and you just want the report from them, very limited interaction, then I think working off a flat fee for that works pretty well. But if you're wanting a lot of interaction, you want the conservator to be involved in collecting the data sheets, you want the conservator to have meetings with the fabricators and the installers, then yeah, I mean, it can be a lot more expensive. And so I think it was great for me to work for the artist, because then we agreed on kind of like an hourly rate and a set price and exactly what my involvement would be. And then anytime I kind of got close to like the higher end of a quote, I would always contact them and say, okay, like I'm already getting there, like getting close there. Like, are you sure you still want me to work on this? Are you sure like you want me to spend my time on this? Because it's really about, like spending my time wisely. And if you're asking me to read constantly, check on all of these emails, it's time. So it's also part of the whole process too, is like managing your conservator's time.
We have a question about documentation. At
Okay.
what stage do you suggest the artwork to be documented, and do you suggest to include that kind of deliverable in the contract?
In the contract, you mean between the fabricator and the artist, do you think? Is that?
Then would you like to
Sorry.
expand your question? she here? I don't know where she is. I'm guessing, let me go back. Yes, in the contract for subs.
Oh, for subs. Okay. So, I think that is also a part of the negotiation, right? Because usually the sub doesn't want you to take forever on checking the condition of the artwork because they want the rest of their money and they want to be released from liability. So I think exactly how much time you spend on that depends on your schedule, depends on whom you have to involve. I mean, sometimes you have to involve your project manager, the artist, whomever you're hiring to do the inspection. Also, if it's at a warehouse, you have to coordinate the space and the time to have access in the warehouse. So I think it's really kind of a discussion that you have to have with your sub and say, like, for instance, your fabricator, to say, look, I need this much time to be able to coordinate all the different people involved for the final inspection. And then it's kind of a back and forth. You can say, I want a week. And then they say, well, maybe only 3 days. I think it varies. What kind of condition report? I mean, it's up to you. Do you want a full detailed condition report? You can ask for that. It will take a bit longer. If you want a very cursory assessment where it's just kind of a scan, make sure nothing's missing, that can actually be a lot quicker. But it's just more about someone is signing off and saying, I accept the artwork as it is right now, and you are released from liability.
And would you also recommend if the fabrication studio is accessible, that perhaps asking if the artist can see process?
Oh yeah, if you can, absolutely. I mean, I also know that during COVID, it gets a little funny too about who's allowed into the studio. But if you can, check in or devise some sort of system to check in on progress and do quality check. That's crucial. That's crucial because it is difficult on your timeline for your project to wait until the very, very end after fabrication to then check on quality and have that be your first check. Because, tight schedule, that can be pretty rough. So yes, I think working in some sort of schedule or some sort of system to check on progress and check on quality as the fabricator is in the process of fabricating is really important. And maybe that's something you need to work into your contract as well.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a lot of great comments. One similar to this is asking for photos, pre-packing, and then installer photos when they're in their hands pre-shipping.
Mm-hmm. Also, you can ask your shipping company to do documentation too. I used to work for an art. I used to be an art handler before I was a conservator, and that would be one of the things I do all the time. Is kind of like a quick inspection, photographs, and sometimes if the art handler is packing, then they'll do their documentation pre and post packing. Before putting into the crate, take images of the crate itself too, both the artwork in the crate as well as the crate itself, because if there's always kind of this question of like, well, is it the packing that was a problem or was the crate damaged? And then that was actually is within the handling itself. I think that also kind of comes up with liability. So yeah, so you can please take lots of photos. It helps you. It won't hurt you.
Lily, can you share more about if there's like some standard expectations around warranties that artists should be kind of entering into conversations with fabricators and installers about? Because I think sometimes that right there, just knowing what to expect and ask for sometimes is unknown if it's like your first big project or.
Yeah, so I think it's always best to start with asking your fabricator if they have a set warranty. Because if they've been in business for a while, they probably already have worked out their liability, right? And I think like one fabricator that we're working with has like a 5-year warranty, which is actually pretty generous. But also for large scale commissions, you likely have a contract with the entity that's funding your commission, and they likely have a clause in there about how long how long you as the artist is responsible for warranty of the artwork, right? And so if they say a year, anything happens during the first year, you as the artist needs to, basically pay for replacement or repair. Then okay, well, my contract with such and such entity is for a year. And if your fabricator or your sub doesn't have a set time, then you can tell them that, like, look, I have to be responsible for a year, so can we put it down for a year with your warranty? And just have a discussion. And the thing is like, there is a limit to how much you can ask for, right? You can't say forever and ever and ever for as long as this artwork is on display. You are the fabricator are responsible for fixing it, for free. I mean, that's not very reasonable, right? It's all about kind of, pushing back and forth and negotiating. And I think most fabricators will agree at least to an artwork that is free from flaws, free from workmanship error. And also, when you start bringing in issues of inherent vice and you're vetting the material and vetting the fabricator's methods, you can put that in to your contract and say that, the fabricator is ensuring that the material is, covered for inherent vice because you've discussed it all already.
So that concept, inherent vice,
yeah.
I love the phrasing on that. And that was something that I kind of more recently learned. Can you explain that for those that might not be familiar with that concept and kind of how that fits into this?
It's just it's basically a catch-all term for materials kind of destructing itself. Deterioration happens because of the actual makeup of the material. And so, for instance, if you're working on a metal sculpture, perhaps, the general rule is don't mix your metals because that's when galvanic corrosion will occur, right? And so you discuss with your fabricator and say, I don't want you welding mild to stainless steel because then galvanic corrosion will occur. Or you look into what the nuts and bolts are made of. And, the nuts and bolts are made of stainless, but we're attaching it to a mild steel and the galvanic corrosion is going to occur. So you start discussing, okay, we need to have some sort of barrier or some kind of coating, or maybe we just stick to the same materials. And by saying, that the fabricator is ensuring that they are using materials that you've worked out beforehand that will not essentially self-destruct. That they're ensuring that the materials that they are putting together are compatible and won't cause issues within itself or to each other. Does that make sense? So.
And installers as well, right? Because there are certain adhesives that
exactly
only go inside, but somebody decides to put them outside or
exactly
on the window.
Exactly. And once a material from an installation is incorporated with an artwork, it does become a part of the artwork. And super important actually, because installation materials are what's securing the art, right? And if it's a public artwork and you have people walking underneath or around the art, You don't want failure of installation materials. So compatibility and materials that are strong enough to support the art and won't interact negatively with the artwork. I mean, that's so crucial because it's not just about preservation, but it could actually be a safety issue. So yeah.
So that's kind of interesting to me, because I would think that would be kind of the territory of like a structural engineer. But as you're bringing up, there's maybe considerations where a conservator could add more to the conversation or just insight that a structural engineer who's not, I don't know, is that a question or?
You are so right. A conservator can maybe help point out to you, hey, this is a potential issue, especially when it comes to safety. But there is a limitation to a conservator's knowledge because we are not engineers. So will you need to have a structural engineer on your team? Yeah, sometimes. Sometimes it's really advisable. Because, I mean, I think a conservator can kind of like look at the spec sheets, look at your materials, look at the site and the environment and say, okay, there may or may not be an issue here. I would recommend that you consult with a structural engineer. And the engineer is so, I mean, they know their materials. They know how to kind of look at the different materials and say, okay, this is fine. This nut and bolt system is like totally sufficient. It can withhold a certain number of, pounds in weight. I mean, like at Watts where I work with two different engineers. And every time we do a structural repair, we call them out and they consult with us and they kind of say, okay, this works, that may not be a good idea. And it's super helpful. It's super helpful. And it definitely goes beyond our knowledge base because as conservators, we're not engineers.
So, I'm just, I'm thinking about for artists, maybe aren't working quite at that scale yet, and are thinking about, projects that they're producing for galleries or, more informal exhibition type context. Do you work with artists in those types of spaces? And do you think like maybe involving a conservator in that process is also important?
Yeah, so I have a lot of friends who are artists and most of them don't work on large scale commissions quite yet because they're still kind of early on in their career. And I get a lot of messages, a lot of emails, a lot of DMs on Instagram, always just saying, hey, what about this material? What about that material? I think I'm happy that my friends recognize me as a resource. And that they care about preservation. I guess they've heard me talk about this enough that they're like, hey, but yeah, at the end of the day, I know that for like large scale commissions, you have the considerations of the entity that's paying for the commission to consider. But if you're hiring subs, I don't think it's any different. I mean, you got to have a good contract. It's really protecting you. And like I said, it's protecting your money. So I think it would be great if you can. I know that sometimes money is an issue and conservators can be expensive. So maybe you can work out a flat fee that's amenable to you. And then sort of work out like, okay, what my expectations are and just sort of limit, say, okay, I don't want you to like be in there every step of the way because I can't afford your time. But maybe you can just at least review materials. That alone, I think, would be extremely useful.
Mm-hmm. So how else can a conservator be helpful or be a resource to an artist, even post-installation?
Well, I think Shannon kind of really gave great examples for that, because I mean, I guess like I'm coming from the perspective of working alongside the artists right now, with the commission itself while the art is being created and designed and fabricated. But I've also done artist interviews too. I mean, the majority of the projects that I work on are well after fabrication, and it's had a whole life. And deterioration issues are coming up, and every time it's a modern contemporary art piece, there's always an element of working with the artist, of working with the foundations. And I think Shannon really covered those bases really well. You know, you can conduct artist interviews, you can talk to fabricators. I've worked with fabricators who were brought back on to an installation well after the artwork was made. It was like a James Turrell piece, and he had one particular fabricator that worked on his model way back in the day, decades ago. And when it was going to be installed, he hired back the same fabricator to come out. And I worked alongside her, and I kind of documented her process, you know, the different pigments that she used, the way she applied the pigment. And so I didn't work with the artist, but I worked with the fabricator, who, from a material standpoint, is crucial to the longevity of this model. And I wrote it all up, and it was very informal. I didn't have any prepared questions. As Shannon said yesterday, sometimes the informal conversations are the best. But I still got a lot of really great information from working with her. So, yeah.
And how important are like guidelines for maintenance?
Super important. And fabricators and installers can assist with this. And part of that whole package that I was saying you need to collect during your conversations with your fabricator, part of that is our maintenance questions, right? What can I use to clean it? What should I avoid using when I clean it? And a lot of times they'll already have a warranty setup saying, if you use any abrasives, like sandblasting, if you use anything acidic or basic, you know, they'll have their parameters and say that if damage has occurred to the artwork due to the way you improperly maintain the artwork, then we are not liable for that damage. So it's crucial to talk to your fabricator about maintenance. And also, I mean, other issues too that like Kiernan covered, graffiti, vandalism, they very well may have guidelines, tips about how to remove graffiti, recommendations perhaps about additional coatings or sealants. So it's really important actually to talk to both your fabricator and your installer, and maybe even have a joint meeting between everyone and discuss maintenance.
We have a question. So if we're submitting a proposal for, say, Metro or any other commission institution, do we need to consult with a conservator about a project that is large and permanent, or do those institutions have advice built into the process? So I think
that's a question for you, Elena.
I think it depends on, and I know Metro is a little bit different. I don't know their exact process, and there's probably people here on this call who know more than I do, because I believe they have in-house fabricators and installers. So it's you know, the bulk of the work is already being taken care of for you. But I don't know very many institutions that commission that have in-house conservators. Some may not. So there's plenty of conservators available, especially in large that you can find on our American Institute for Conservation website. Find a conservator, or there's I take that back. There are a couple of places where the collections manager, for example, us, Culver City, where the collections manager who works within that department is trained in conservation. So, but we also have our own focuses on materials, so we may not be able to answer every question.
But generally, just to add to that, with civic arts process at the county, we are lucky to have Lilania, who is a trained conservator, and a wide network of wonderful friends and colleagues like Lilenya or like Lily, who she can reach out to for very like specific material questions. So within our context, we do have in-house information and expertise that will support the artists in providing.
Yes. But we also, if we cannot, we do require our artists to consult with conservators for their projects. Are there any other questions for Lily? Any site specific or environmental specific or install specific questions? Or are we okay? So thank you, Lily. I think our goal is to make sure that artists know that they have the resource in conservation to ensure the long-term preservation of their artwork and to ensure that the intent of the artist is held solely by the artist, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, my intention is never to override what the artist wants. It's always about trying to understand what the artist wants, what their intent is, what they're going for, and then working with them to try and help them achieve both that goal and preservation considerations, and trying my hardest to find that middle ground. But never to say, oh no, don't do this, don't do that. Absolutely not. Yeah, it's always about working, compromise, discussion. Yeah.
Great. Well, we'll be back at 11 with Magdalena Solano and Nyla Bird, who are going to be talking about storage, handling, and transporting your art. So we'll get into more specifics around those kinds of concerns that you or issues you might have encountered in your practice. So stay tuned. We'll be back. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Lily, so much for being here and giving us a lot to think about. So
great. Thank you for having me.
Word. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Bye.